Good afternoon to you. It's 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. And of course, a lot of news breaking as always. Joining us today to discuss the state of our economy as the Trump administration set to begin in just a couple of days. EJ Antoni, America's economist, will be with us. Gabriel Naronha is here at 4 o'clock from Polaris National Security, a former State Department advisor on Iran. We'll get his reaction to the news of the emerging deal involving Israel, Hamas, the United States, Qatar, a lot of moving pieces here. Gabriel will weigh in with what his reaction is. Jason Isaac joins us from the American Energy Institute at 4:30. This as there's a hearing for the incoming Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, going on today. And then Tom Fitton is here at 5 o'clock from Judicial Watch to weigh in on Pam Bondi's confirmation hearing, again, going on today to become the Attorney General of the United States of America. You can join us. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. In just the last few hours, lots of news coming out on this deal in the Middle East to try and bring about a peace, at least for now. Now, it seems like a lot of the coverage of this and a lot of reaction to this is the idea that this represents somehow an end to the war between Israel and Hamas, which is, of course, an Iranian proxy. That is not what this is. This is a pause. This is a pause to the fighting. Is it progress? Well, yeah, I think it's some degree of progress. And President Trump today is very pleased to announce the role that just the fact that he's arriving on Monday has played in all of this. President Trump's team has been very active in trying to get these hostages released out of Gaza and to bring an end to the bloodshed. And here's what he said on Truth Social today. He came out way before Joe Biden attempted to say anything on the subject. He said, quote, "This epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. I am thrilled American and Israeli hostages will be returning home to be reunited with their families and loved ones. With this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. We will continue promoting peace through strength throughout the region as we build upon the momentum of this ceasefire to further expand the historic Abraham Accords. This is only the beginning of great things to come for America and indeed the world. We have achieved so much without even being in the White House. Just imagine all of the wonderful things that will happen when I return to the White House and my administration is fully confirmed so they can secure more victories for the United States." All right, so that's President Trump today, sounding an optimistic note, crediting Steve Witkoff, who's been very active in these negotiations to try and get things solved. And there's a couple of pieces here. We're awaiting, at some point, I assume, Benjamin Netanyahu's going to make some public remarks on the subject. He had already indicated earlier today that some of the details of this deal have yet to be worked out, but he expects a lot of that to be resolved by tonight. And the reporting we're seeing today is that the deal itself is expected to officially start on Sunday, January 19th. That would be right as President Trump is arriving for the inauguration on January 20th. Of course, you can't miss the parallels to the Iranian hostage crisis and Ronald Reagan's arrival as president of the United States. President Trump, of course, during the campaign and even beyond his election victory, saying that he was going to fight to bring about a peace even before he got into office. And it appears some kind of peace may be arriving. Perhaps a fragile one, but President Trump, again, taking credit today for an epic deal, saying his advisor, Steve Witkoff, the guy who's been his emissary, has been working very hard. You may have been listening to the Dan Bongino program just a moment ago, and he was saying something that I also agree with, which is that there's just no way anything meaningful gets done with Joe Biden and company in charge of American foreign policy. Nobody takes them seriously. If your foreign policy consists of using the contraction "don't" when you speak to America's adversaries, you're not actually going to achieve anything. especially if you're Joe Biden, because no one believes you. No one believes you. And there's a gentleman who is the U.S. ambassador. He was the Israeli ambassador to the United States. You've heard him here on WMAL before, Michael Oren, who's come on. He wrote a big piece today on this whole hostage deal. And this was kind of just ahead of its official announcement, but he wrote it for the Free Press, is the name of the site. And he wrote, the headline on it is, "The hostage deal is the price of Israel's failures," he says. And what he's referencing are a couple of things, but among them, sort of the intelligence failures that took place on October 7th that led to Israel being as vulnerable as it was to this horrific attack by Hamas. And the other piece, which is how do you resolve all of this? Because you can't achieve everything that you want because of the hostages' lives that are at stake. He writes in this piece today that Israel believed that by increasing military pressure on Hamas, it could compel the terrorists to free the hostages. The strategy appeared to work when, in November of 2023, Hamas released 105 of its 251 hostages in exchange for a week-long ceasefire and the freeing of 240 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Israel reasonably assumed that ratcheting up its operations in Gaza, especially in Hamas's Rafah stronghold, would yield similar results. But Hamas thought otherwise, he writes. Surprised by Israel's determination to resume fighting after the ceasefire and convinced that mounting international condemnation of the war's conduct would soon force the Israelis to surrender, the terrorist group dug in its heels. Israeli forces would enter Rafah and several refugee camps, killing senior Hamas leaders, and dispel the terrorists' hope of the opening of a second front with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yet, no new hostage deal ensued. Hamas still insisted on an unlimited ceasefire and a complete Israeli withdrawal from the Strip. Instead of buckling to military pressure and releasing hostages, the terrorists shot them. They killed hostages during this phase. And so the issues that Israel has been facing throughout all of this is we would like the total defeat of Hamas, but we'd also like the return of the hostages. Now, in an ideal world, presumably Israel would be able to surgically remove the hostages somehow and then kill all of Hamas, but apparently they weren't able to do that. So the questions become, how do we get these hostages out? What can we do? And Hamas, of course, using those hostages as leverage in order to, as human shields to stay alive and try and secure whatever concessions they could out of Israel and prolong the war. So it's been tough. It's about as tough as it gets. Look, the Middle East is always about as tough as it gets as an issue. And we get to today. What has changed, Michael Oren writes? What has changed? He says, well, although the White House deserves credit for persevering in the hostage release talks, he's talking about the Biden White House that they've been yammering on for many months, the deal probably owes much to the soon incoming president's threat to visit all hell on Hamas and his ability to press Netanyahu, says Michael Oren. That, in other words, Donald Trump is the only person who all sides take seriously in the region. Netanyahu and Joe Biden have a terrible relationship. Biden treats him like complete garbage. And I was saying before, I'm kind of expecting a statement from Netanyahu soon. And when he delivers this statement, my only question is, does he mention the weakness of Biden explicitly, or is it implicit in his remarks? Because if you're Netanyahu today and you're agreeing to this deal, you are doing it, one, because you want to maintain a strong relationship with the United States. In order to do that, you have to have a good relationship with this incoming president of the United States who actually has his faculties about him, President Donald Trump. And the other is that you genuinely believe that President Trump is a better president for your own country's future. In other words, Israel is convinced that their security, to the extent the United States is involved, is in a better situation than with Joe Biden and his merry band of idiots in charge. So Israel is willing to enter into a deal, including with this bloodthirsty terrorist organization, Hamas. Imagine how difficult that is for these Israelis to do that, because they have some knowledge that the United States has stronger leadership now, that they've got some options on how to deal with things going forward, that there's a credible threat hanging over Hamas as they They will keep hostages. This is not the release of all of the hostages. Today, we're looking at the release of 33 hostages, 33 of them, alive and dead. Not all of them are alive. We're talking 33, some bodies. And so 33 hostages will be released in the first stage. Dozens, alive and dead, will remain in Gaza, prolonging their family's suffering. And they're saying that among the people who are being released, it'll be the elderly, the infirm, the weakened, expected to be within the first groups that are likely to be released here, including some very young children. Hamas is set to, beginning as early as Sunday, Hamas is set to release 33 hostages, women, the aged, and the infirm, and children, among them the Bibas babies who've kind of received international attention, these very, very young babies who are being held captive by Hamas. And then there will be 2 more phases. Those subsequent 2 phases, should they go well, we'll see the release of all 98 hostages, living and dead, and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the entire Gaza Strip. So we'll see. And in President Trump's case, he mentioned here kind of what I was alluding to, which is that, quote, remember Trump saying this, "We will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven." That's the security guarantee. That's the United States saying, look, let's try and bring a peace here. And Benjamin Netanyahu and company, Israel, you should know that the United States stands ready to offer you the support we need to in order to help guarantee some of this security. Critical. I mean, look, October 7th, that terror attack happened on not just as a result of failures of intelligence going on in Israel, which, of course, deserves scrutiny in order to prevent that type of attack from taking place again, but also who's the powerhouse in the intel community on the global stage? Who is the most integrated ally with Israel? Well, that's the United States. So October 7th, to the extent that there were intelligence failures, how many of them were Tony Blinken's fault? How many of them were the Biden administration's fault? And so some of this could be just intelligence sharing. Some of this could be putting Israel in a better position to be able to detect these threats as they emerge. Not everything needs to be boots on the ground. Not everything needs to be a situation where American bloodshed could be forthcoming. Some of this could just be being vigilant and being a good ally and very supportive. So there's a lot to kind of digest here. But again, like I said, Bongino brought this up, and I'll reiterate this point. This doesn't happen if Kamala Harris gets elected president of the United States. There's no progress whatsoever. And you can look at this deal and say, hey, I'm dissatisfied with how it's beginning. I want to see every single hostage released. I want to see Hamas wiped off the face of the earth. We've got Americans who are being held hostage by Hamas, not expected, 3 of them that are believed to be alive, not expected to be released by Hamas in this first round. That's something that's a direct American interest, American citizens. So that's where you expect the fight to continue. But you see here, President Trump not just saying that the burden for this region needs to be placed on the shoulders of the United States entirely. He says that he wants to continue to expand the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are bilateral agreements between Arab states and Israel in order to enhance their relations and bring about a peace in the Middle East. How many American foreign policy leaders, presidents have come and gone and tried to have some gigantic deal where they could fix all of this in one fell swoop? President Trump came along and he said, let's try something different. Let's try bilateral agreements. We'll take each country one by one, and we'll bring them to the table with Israel. We'll see if you can't work out a deal. We'll create some stability in the region. And the progress had begun. It was underway. And the Biden administration, right on top of everything else, they created more instability, chaos, and destruction, not just in that region, but all across the globe. So if the beginning of the Trump administration is that the peace signal is starting to emerge, that's a good step in the right direction. President Trump today saying this is an epic deal. I know that there's a lot of debate about how epic people think this deal is. You want to get these American citizens out. But again, No progress towards peace happens with Joe Biden. Nobody takes him seriously. He mutters the word don't, and everybody does. And something's very different when Donald Trump's in office. We've learned that already. It's 322 now.
If the deal isn't done before I take office, which is now going to be 2 weeks, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Hamas doesn't want hell to break out. So some sort of deal is coming in. President Trump today saying it's epic. Although Joe Biden today gave a statement taking all the credit in the world, saying he did this, he made this happen. A reporter asking, wait, who gets credit for this, you or Trump?
Who gets credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
But his State Department spokesman, Matthew Miller, had this to say today.
When it comes to the involvement of President-elect Trump's team, it has been absolutely critical in getting this deal over the line. And it's been critical because, obviously, as I stand here today, this administration's term in office will expire in 5 days. And one of the things that we have always said about this deal is that when you get from stage 1 to stage 2, that the United States, Egypt, and Qatar are the guarantors of this deal. And Egypt and Qatar will push Hamas to stay at the bargaining table and to get from stage 1 to stage 2, and the United States will push Israel to stay at the bargaining table to get from phase 1 and phase 2.
I do love that they're acting like this is like a baton handoff, that we work so well together, hand in glove. They're like, two peas in a pod. No, nothing. There was nothing changed whatsoever until the American people said we're sending in a new commander-in-chief. We're going to discuss some of the contours of this deal, specifically kind of the upsides, the downsides, the risks, the perils, with Gabriel Noronha coming up at 4 o'clock. We'll, again, dive deeper into the details there and also talk about President Trump's role and how he might be able to bring a more lasting peace and especially get those American hostages back. That's ahead. Also, we talk about the state of our economy with EJ Antoni in just mere moments. And, boy, I can't wait to get to that audio as Pam Bondi forces pencil neck to snap. Good afternoon to you. It's 3:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Gabriel Noronha joins us at 4 o'clock. We talk about the emerging Israel-Hamas deal and what's ahead there. And then at 4:30, Jason Isaac will be with us from the American Energy Institute as Chris Wright, the incoming Secretary of Energy, faces down his confirmation hearing today. And then Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch joins us at 5 o'clock. That's to discuss Pam Bondi, the incoming Attorney General of the United States, who's been doing great today, smacking Adam Schiff around, which I'm enjoying. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joe Biden set to give a big valedictory speech, maybe? I guess that's how you would say it, tonight. His exit address to the nation. No doubt he is going to have a feeble flurry of lies. He's going to tell you that the economy is in a great place, that the border is wonderful, that the international situation is the best it's ever been. He will gaslight you in the laziest possible way this evening. But ahead of that, I think it's probably worth taking a closer look. Where are we, especially economically? Here to help us do that, the in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show and part-time economist at the Heritage Foundation, EJ Antoni. Good to have you back with us, sir.
Vince, always great to be with you. Thanks for having me again.
I shouldn't get you in trouble. He's a full-time economist at Heritage. The part-time thing is what he does with us. Hey, the state of the economy, I saw you posting about this as you so often do. Do more Americans have jobs now than when Biden took office?
Well, compared to when Biden took office, the answer there is yes. But that's really just largely a function of the fact that when Biden took office, you still had literally dozens of governors in blue states, Democrat governors, who were still keeping their economies forcibly closed. It was literally illegal for many people to go to work. So of course, when those restrictions are lifted, millions of people all of a sudden start going back to work. We shouldn't be surprised by that. And so what you really need to do is compare where are we today versus where were we pre-pandemic, and where are we headed today versus the pre-pandemic trend. And as soon as you make that, which is more of an apples to apples comparison, you find that we have fallen way, way behind. In fact, there are actually fewer native-born Americans working today than there were before the pandemic. Americans have literally gone backwards over the last 5 years.
Fewer Americans are working today, fewer native-born Americans working today than before the pandemic, meaning that to the extent that people have jobs, they've all the job gains have gone to foreign-born workers, right?
That's exactly right, Vince. Spot on. And so when the president talks about how, oh, we're adding all of these jobs and the economy's going like gangbusters, no,
Yeah.
it really isn't. This is part of the reason why Americans voted his party out in November. They were unhappy with the direction, and you can tell them how many jobs there are all day long, but they're not the ones with the jobs, so of course they're unhappy. And even the Americans that have jobs, Vince, what we've observed increasingly is they're losing full-time jobs and having to replace them with multiple part-time jobs. This is part of the reason why the jobs numbers have gone up so quickly. We actually have fewer full-time jobs today than we did a year ago. Instead, what's happening is all of the job growth is part-time, and all of the job growth actually on net is also going to foreign-born workers, as you pointed out.
And a huge percentage is going to government, right?
Exactly. There are more people working for government today than ever before. In fact, over the last year, 500,000 additional people in surveys are now saying that they work for the government, which is one of the key things that's keeping down the unemployment rate. The problem is that's just not sustainable. For every person who's going to work on the taxpayer dime,
Yes.
you need many taxpayers actually paying those taxes to support that person. It's not uncommon that you need a ratio of 40-1 or higher. And this goes not just for people who work directly for government, but also you could say who are indirect government hires. And this is something we've talked about before, where if the government gives a grant, let's say, to a hospital, and then the hospital hires someone, it could be a nurse, it could be a janitor, literally anyone, doesn't matter. That person's salary is still covered by the taxpayer.
Right.
And so what looks like private sector employment growth actually isn't. It's really another government job in the sense that it's taxpayer funded. We see the exact same thing when we look at the GDP numbers, when we look at consumer spending.
Yes.
An increasing portion of private consumer spending is actually just government transfers. It would be the same thing as if the government spent money on asphalt or concrete to pave a road. They're just giving it away to somebody else who's then spending it, and for some reason we count it as private spending. It's really not.
Yeah, it's very deceptive, as you point out. Okay, let's talk about consumer spending, actually, for a moment, because we got new data this morning. I believe this is the last round of consumer inflation data before the incoming Trump administration, showing that things were, quote, slightly hotter than expected in December, that consumer prices were up 2.9% for the 12 months that ended in December. And that outpaced expectations. What do you make of this inflation data? What does it mean?
Well, it means inflation is re-accelerating, just as we talked about several months ago, that this was likely to happen based on the government continuing to overspend, based on the Federal Reserve prematurely cutting interest rates in what I think was a move of election interference. Prices just for the month of December rose 0.4%. That may not sound like much, but you do that for a whole year and it's 4.8%. This is the fastest inflation rate on a monthly basis since March. At that pace, prices actually double in less than 15 years. So it may not sound like much when you hear, okay, 0.4% in a single month. That's actually horrific. And again, if you look at how things have fared over the course of the entire Biden administration, prices are up 21%. Again, these are terrible numbers. The dollar has lost a fifth of its value in just under 4 years. It's terrible.
The Biden administration seems to be stoking some last-minute of inflation on the way out as well. The Biden-Harris administration's Internal Revenue Service just greenlit sending out $2.4 million in stimulus payments into the economy. And they are apparently issuing payments to Americans who didn't claim what they refer to as the recovery rebate credit back on their 2021 tax returns. I believe this is the result of Joe Biden's out-of-control spending package that he kicked in as soon as he arrived in office. And now the Biden administration has decided to fire cash out of a T-shirt cannon into the American economy as they head out the door. Is that inflationary? Am I right about that?
Oh, you're spot on, Vince. It's going to do exactly now what it did the first time, and what it did the second time, and what it did the third time. I mean, how many times do you have to learn the lesson before you realize what the effect here is going to be? Or maybe they know what the effect is going to be, and they are doing it intentionally. We kind of are in the loot the treasury stage, if you think about it. The Biden and Yellen are leaving Trump with a Treasury cash balance at the New York Fed. It's basically the Treasury's checking account, if you want to think of it that way. They are leaving Trump with a Treasury cash balance that is $1 trillion less than the cash balance he left them. So, yes, they are very much looting the Treasury, and they're doing as much economic harm as they can on their way out the door.
Yeah, it doesn't help people. I realize that there's like some fantasy game, like on the surface, it looks like, oh, money is being sent to Americans. That's not what's happening. They're pushing all this cash into the economy, which is actually going to drive up costs for everyone. It's a disaster. The other economic news I wanted to discuss with you today is that President Trump has now officially announced the creation of something he's referring to as the External Revenue Service, not the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, but instead the External Revenue Service. And it supposedly, as I understand it, it's about the tax revenue that we will be able to take in via especially tariffs from overseas, not from Americans, but instead from overseas. What do you think of this idea of an ERS?
I absolutely love it, Vince, for a couple of different reasons, not the least of which, and this is something that the president has highlighted multiple times now, is the fact that during America's golden age, when we had our fastest economic growth, especially for sustained periods, we didn't even have an income tax. We weren't taxing our own citizens with a personal income tax. No, the government was relying exclusively on tariffs for its revenue, for its tax receipts. And so you had foreigners footing a lot of the bill on behalf of Americans. And that was really good considering all of the benefits that we were providing the rest of the world. I think that was a pretty fair deal. And it worked out for Americans. It worked out for the rest of the world. Most importantly, it worked out for Americans because that's what we're concerned about. But at the end of the day, anything that's going to get us away from income taxes, in other words, reduce income tax rates and increase tariffs, I am all for that. I think it is a brilliant formula. Now, how on earth are they actually going to do this, especially when you have an institution like the Bureau of Customs and Border Protection that technically already covers this? There's going to be a lot of changes, I think, coming to tariffs and also non-tariff barriers in the coming years. And I think it's going to be much more than Bureau of Customs and Border Protection can actually handle. Also, I think it'd be good if we get a lot of the tariff stuff back under the Treasury, return it to what used to be the Customs Service. And at the end of the day, you're also going to need to look at things like how China is manipulating their currency. One of the things, if I remember correctly, we talked about last time is how Chinese manufacturers are basically the Leah Thomas of the manufacturing world, right? Where they are essentially manipulating their currency down to make their exports artificially cheap so that our domestic producers can't compete with them anymore. And under the first Trump administration, the Treasury Secretary at the time had started looking into that and was looking at ways to penalize China. Unfortunately, though, it never really went anywhere. I think that is going to be a big topic of discussion in the incoming Trump administration in round two here. And I think that they are going to need a new agency, something like an External Revenue Service, that is handling not only existing and upcoming tariff measures, but also brand new ones, such as handling currency manipulation.
Yeah, and it also, President Trump saying this, that he wants an External Revenue Service, and you're right, all the reporting that I've seen so far suggests that at least at the outset, that they're going to repurpose other offices, including within the Treasury Department, to achieve this goal. But it sends a crystal clear message that he's not joking, that he wasn't just throwing this around as a campaign talking point. He really, really means it. And the end goal, of course, the left won't tell you this. They keep saying this is all just going to be a tax on Americans. Suddenly they realize, what input costs do to the final products. But just as they describe this, they're like, oh, Americans are going to pay the brunt of this. Americans are going to pay for this. Well, no, as we've discussed, EJ, what this does is it creates incentives to bring all of that manufacturing and production onshore. It makes it so that Americans are in a situation where we can prioritize the purchase of American-made and American-produced goods. instead of giving away our money to unfair actors like China.
Exactly, Vince, 100%. I mean, I think what this incoming administration is really going to do is basically just start leveling the playing field. You look at places like Europe where they have things like value-added taxes, which function in a lot of ways because of how they're constructed. They function in a lot of ways like tariffs. And so we should impose the exact same thing on them that they have on us. Now, ideally, we wouldn't have any of these taxes anywhere, right? But if other countries are going to impose them on us, then guess what? We're going to do it right back to you. And we're going to do you a lot more harm than you'll do to us, which is why we're going to win in the end. I mean, look at what's happened with Mexico already starting to bend the knee. Canada, I mean, the president, he's not even in office yet, and he already forced a leader of another country to resign. It's absolutely incredible. He understands the amount of power that he's wielding. He's wielding the American consumer's purchasing power as a weapon on the global financial stage, if you will. And if we can not only level the playing field in terms of taxes, in terms of tariffs, but also level the playing field in terms of regulation through the president's efforts to deregulate. And on top of that, improve our own domestic tax code, you're going to eliminate almost all of the disadvantages that domestic producers have. And all of a sudden, it will once again be worth it to produce things here, to manufacture things here, to make things at home, to employ Americans, what a novel idea, in America to produce goods and services for other Americans.
Man, I wish him all the best. I hope he succeeds. EJ, as always, EJ Antoni, thank you for giving us a clear picture of how this all works. Great to talk to you today, sir. All right, Bill is calling in from Fairfax, not line 2. Hello, Bill. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Vince, I'd just like to say I really appreciate your show. The clarity with respect to the messaging and the content and so forth is really helpful. And I think on the last discussion about employment numbers, a lot can be done to play around with those numbers, obviously, whether it's by the government or anyone else for that matter. And the fact that most of the increases, not increases, but most of the change that we've seen has been in part-time employment, not full-time employment.
Right.
And one other factor I wanted to mention relative to that is many employers, they can save on their benefits costs by obviously not hiring people on a full-time basis.
Yep.
So many times part-time, you have to have a certain eligibility for number of hours that you work per week. So that's another element that's part of that equation, I think. It may encourage employers to only want to go, for the most part, with part-time, although I think there's a real value in having full-time personnel, on board. So this loyalty that goes with that too.
Yes,
so, anyway,
and a lot of that, what you're referencing, a lot of that has to do with government requirements and government getting involved and stifling the ability of these companies to maximize the value they have out of great employees. President Trump wants to try and cut some of that back, including getting rid of taxes on overtime and making it easier for people who are in a deal. They have an arrangement, an employer and employee who say, hey, let's maximize the amount of time that you can work if you so desire. The government really creates a lot of the problems here, don't they, Bill?
No, absolutely. And I think that the extent to which you can actually demonstrate to your employees, if you're an employer, right, you can demonstrate to your employees that you truly do care about them. And you have these other opportunities for people who are, frankly, many people out there, they're struggling to be able to make ends meet.
Yes.
And having those particular incentives and opportunities, I think, will make a big difference.
It makes a huge difference.
It will create that sense of engagement. I mean, if you look at the levels of employee engagement as measured by, for example, the Gallup organization and others, it's very low. It's very low. In fact, it's the lowest it's been probably in about 10 or 11 years.
Yeah,
so
and people jump jobs at
the
the highest rates they ever have. The job shifting is crazy, and that's because there's that lack of shared purpose. You're right. Not everyone's rowing in the same direction. They don't see the long-term benefit of sticking with something. And so hopefully we can correct for some of that. Thank you, Bill. Great point on what's going on in our economy. Hey, coming up, I want to talk about this emerging deal that President Trump is saying is epic, involving Israel, Hamas, maybe an end to some of the bloodshed, a pause to the fighting. Gabriel Noronha will talk about the terms of the deal and President Trump's role in all of it.